The champagne glasses were still raised when I stood up from my seat at the back of the ballroom. 300 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits turned to look at me, the woman in the simple navy dress, the one who had been seated at the table farthest from the head table, the one whose place card had been handwritten at the last minute and shoved between the caterer's assistant and a distant cousin nobody remembered inviting. My daughter Melissa's face went white. Her new husband, Bradley Thornton III, set down his champagne flute with the kind of careful precision that told me he was calculating his next move. He was always calculating. That was what made him dangerous. That was also what would make this so satisfying. "I'd like to say a few words," I said, my voice carrying across the grand ballroom of the Thornton estate with a clarity that surprised even me. The string quartet stopped mid-note. The servers froze with their silver trays. Bradley's mother, Victoria, clutched her pearls, literally clutched them, and looked at her husband with an expression that screamed do something. But there was nothing they could do. Not anymore. I wasn't on the program, I continued, walking slowly toward the center of the room. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step measured, deliberate. In fact, I wasn't supposed to speak at all. I wasn't supposed to be in the family photos. I wasn't even supposed to sit with the other parents. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Bradley's college friends exchange glances. His boss from Mercer and Whitfield Partners, one of the most prestigious private equity firms in Boston, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "But I think it's important," I said, reaching into my small clutch purse, "that everyone here knows exactly who they're celebrating tonight." Bradley's jaw tightened. He started to rise from his chair, but his father's hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Stay calm," that grip said. "Don't make a scene." Too late for that. I pulled out a single USB drive and held it up so the light caught its metallic surface. "This," I said, "contains 3 years of financial records from Mercer and Whitfield Partners. Specifically, records showing how Bradley Thornton III has been systematically embezzling client funds to pay off gambling debts he's hidden from everyone in this room, including his new wife." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ice melting in the nearest water glass. Melissa's bouquet slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. White roses scattered across the marble like fallen stars. "Mom," she whispered. "What are you doing?" I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, brilliant daughter who had stopped returning my calls 6 months ago, who had let her future husband convince her that I was an embarrassment, that my 25 years of sacrifice meant nothing compared to the Thornton name and the Thornton money and the Thornton future she was buying into. "I'm doing what I should have done the moment he called me a worthless loser," I said calmly. "I'm telling the truth." Bradley finally stood, his face a mask of controlled fury. "This is ridiculous. She's clearly having some kind of episode." "Security." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said. "Not with Robert Chen sitting right there." Every head in the room turned to look at the distinguished man at table 3, the man Bradley had been trying to impress all night, the man who controlled the largest pension fund that Mercer and Whitfield managed, the man who had the power to destroy Bradley's career with a single phone call. Robert Chen, my former business partner. Robert Chen, who had helped me build a medical supply company from nothing and sell it for $47 million 15 years ago. Robert Chen, who Bradley had never bothered to research because he'd been too busy researching my daughter's trust fund. "Hello, Bradley," Robert said, and his smile was the kind that preceded corporate executions. Bradley's face went from red to white to a strange grayish color I'd never seen on a living person. "You see," I said, addressing the room now, "the problem with calling someone a worthless loser is that you should probably make sure they actually are one first." I set the USB drive on the nearest table, table 12, where Bradley's fraternity brothers sat with their mouths hanging open, and smoothed down my dress. "I'll leave this here for anyone who's interested. The evidence is quite comprehensive. I've also sent copies to the SEC, the Massachusetts Attorney General," and I paused, savoring the moment, "the partners at Mercer and Whitfield. They should be receiving it right about now." As if on cue, phones began buzzing throughout the ballroom. Bradley's boss pulled out his cell, read something on the screen, and looked at Bradley with an expression that could only be described as homicidal. "You might want to take that," I said to Bradley. "I suspect you're about to have a very long night." I turned and began walking toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Victoria Thornton's voice rise in a shriek. Someone stop her. Someone call the police. She's lying, she has to be lying, Bradley. Tell them she's lying. But Bradley wasn't saying anything. Bradley was staring at his phone, at the dozens of messages flooding in, at the career and the reputation and the carefully constructed life that was crumbling around him in real time. I reached the ballroom doors and paused, turning back one final time. My daughter was still standing at the head table, her wedding dress pristine and her face shattered. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to tell me I was the bravest person she knew, who used to say she wanted to be just like me when she grew up. That girl had been gone for a long time. Maybe she'd come back someday. Maybe she wouldn't. But that was her choice to make. I had made mine. Congratulations on your wedding, sweetheart, I said softly. I hope you got everything you wanted. Then I walked out of the Thornton estate and into the cool September evening, leaving chaos in my wake. They had no idea this was coming. But I had known for 6 months. Let me tell you how we got here. 26 years ago, I was a different woman. I was Linda Reeves then, 28 years old, newly divorced, with a 2-year-old daughter and $63 in my checking account. My ex-husband had left me for his secretary, a cliché so tired I was embarrassed to admit it, and had been so thorough in hiding his assets that my lawyer said it would cost more to find the money than I'd ever recover. So I took Melissa and moved back to my hometown of Worcester, Massachusetts, into the 2-bedroom apartment above my mother's garage. I got a job at a medical supply company as a receptionist, the only position available that offered health insurance, and I told myself this was temporary. This was just the beginning. I didn't know how right I was. The company was small, just 15 employees, run by 2 partners who were better at medicine than business. I answered phones during the day and taught myself accounting at night, taking community college courses while Melissa slept in a playpen beside my desk. Within 2 years, I was running their entire back office. Within 5, I was their operations manager. And within 7, I had identified a gap in the market that nobody else had seen. Medical supplies for home health care were a mess in the early 2000s, overpriced, poorly distributed, and almost impossible for the average family to access without going through a hospital system. I pitched the partners on a direct-to-consumer model, a way to streamline distribution and cut costs by 40%. They weren't interested. So I built it myself. I worked my regular job during the day and built my company, Clarity Medical Supply, at night. I maxed out 3 credit cards. I took out a second mortgage on the small house I'd finally managed to buy. I slept 4 hours a night for 3 years straight. And I never missed a single one of Melissa's soccer games, school plays, or parent-teacher conferences. Robert Chen came on board in year 2, a logistics genius who'd left a corporate job because he believed in what I was building. Together, we grew Clarity from a garage operation to a company with 12 warehouses, 200 employees, and contracts with 30 hospital systems across New England. When we sold the company in 2009, my share was $47 million. But here's the thing about building something from nothing while raising a child alone: you don't have time to flaunt your success. I kept living in the same modest house in Worcester. I drove a Honda Accord. I volunteered at the food bank on weekends and served on the board of the local women's shelter. I put money into Melissa's education, private high school, then Boston University, then an MBA at Wharton, and I set up a trust fund that would ensure she never had to struggle the way I had. I didn't need anyone to know I was wealthy. I just needed to know that Melissa was safe. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe if I'd been flashier, if I'd moved to a big house in Newton or joined the country club circuit, Melissa would have grown up understanding where she came from. Instead, she grew up seeing a mother who clipped coupons and drove a 10-year-old car, and she assumed that's all I was. When she met Bradley Thornton III at her alumni networking event 3 years ago, she was dazzled. How could she not be? He was everything I wasn't: polished, connected, born into wealth rather than having scraped it together penny by penny. He wore success like a tailored suit. He spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no. And he looked at my daughter like she was a prize he intended to win. I wanted to be happy for her. I tried to be happy for her. But from the first dinner, something felt wrong. Bradley was charming, too charming. Every word out of his mouth was calculated for maximum effect. He complimented my pot roast while his eyes scanned my small dining room with barely concealed disdain. He asked about my little job at the medical supply company and nodded with performative interest when I said I'd started in reception. He never asked if I still worked there. He never asked what I did now. He simply assumed he knew everything he needed to know. "Your mother seems nice," he told Melissa afterward. I heard him through the kitchen window while they stood on my porch. "Simple, but nice. It'll be good to give her some Polish once she's part of the family." "She's not simple," Melissa said, but her voice was uncertain. "She's just practical." "Of course, babe. I didn't mean anything by it." But he had. He absolutely had. Over the next 2 years, I watched my daughter transform. The Melissa who used to call me every Sunday and bring over groceries just because started canceling our lunches. The Melissa who used to say she wanted to run her own business someday started talking about how tacky it was when women worked after marriage. The Melissa who used to defend me started going quiet whenever Bradley made little comments about my clothes, my house, my lack of sophistication. She was being absorbed into the Thornton world, and the Thornton world had no room for a mother who didn't fit the mold. I tried to talk to her about it once, 6 months before the wedding. "Sweetheart, I'm worried that Bradley might not have your best interests at heart." "Mom, stop." Her voice was sharp in a way it had never been before. "You don't know him. You don't understand our life. Bradley says you're just jealous because you never had what we have." "What do you have, exactly?" "Success, Mom. Real success. Not just survival." The word hit me like a slap. 25 years of sacrifice. 25 years of building something from nothing, of making sure she never knew what it felt like to choose between groceries and electricity. 25 years of being both mother and father, both provider and protector. And to her, I had just survived. I didn't argue. What was the point? She had already decided who I was, decided it based on Bradley's whispers and the Thorntons' assumptions and her own need to believe she was ascending to something better. So I let her go. I smiled at the engagement party. I wrote a check for the wedding. I kept my mouth shut when I was seated at the back table, when my name was left off the invitation suite, when I wasn't included in any of the planning. I told myself I was being the bigger person. But the truth was, I was just biding my time. Because 3 months before the wedding, I discovered what Bradley Thornton really was. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Thornton estate, a sprawling Georgian mansion in Dover that had been in the family for 4 generations. Crystal chandeliers. Staff in white gloves. A string quartet playing Vivaldi while guests mingled on the terrace overlooking the gardens. I arrived alone, wearing a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, navy blue, modest but elegant, the kind of thing I thought would help me blend in. I was wrong. The moment I walked through the door, Victoria Thornton's eyes swept over me with the efficiency of a barcode scanner, cataloguing every flaw. "Linda," she said, extending a hand that might as well have been made of ice. "How brave of you to come. It's my daughter's wedding. Where else would I be?" Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Bradley mentioned you might be uncomfortable with all of this. He's so thoughtful about these things." She drifted away before I could respond, leaving me standing alone in a sea of people who all seemed to know each other and none of whom made any effort to know me. I found my seat at the far end of a long table, wedged between Bradley's great-aunt Mildred, who was 93 and mostly deaf, and a business associate named Gerald who spent the entire meal on his phone. The seat to my left, which should have been occupied by the mother of the bride, had been reassigned at the last minute according to the place cards. I ate my filet mignon in silence and watched my daughter at the head of the table, laughing at something Bradley whispered in her ear. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged there, in that world of old money and older expectations. Maybe I was wrong about him. Maybe I was just a jealous, bitter woman who couldn't accept that her daughter had outgrown her. And then came the toasts. Bradley's father went first, raising his glass to the continuation of the Thornton legacy. Then his mother, with a speech about how Melissa had exceeded all expectations and was almost like one of us. Then Bradley's best man, with a series of fraternity stories that made the guests roar with laughter. Finally, Bradley stood. He was magnetic, I'll give him that. He knew how to command a room, how to make every person feel like they were the only one who mattered. He looked at Melissa with what appeared to be genuine adoration, and for a moment, I almost believed it. I want to thank everyone who made this possible, he said. My parents, for their endless support. My friends, for keeping me humble, laughter from the crowd, and of course, my beautiful bride-to-be, who has brought more light into my life than I ever thought possible. Melissa beamed. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. But I also want to address something, Bradley continued, and his tone shifted. As many of you know, Melissa comes from a different background than ours. Her mother, he gestured vaguely in my direction, did her best, I'm sure. But it's important to acknowledge that Melissa has risen above her circumstances. She's not defined by where she came from. She's defined by where she's going. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. I sat frozen, my wineglass halfway to my lips. In fact, Bradley said, warming to his theme, I think Melissa's background is what makes her so special. She knows what it's like to have nothing. She appreciates what our family can offer her in a way that someone born into this world never could. She's hungry for more, and I admire that about her. Hungry. Like a stray dog grateful for scraps. Melissa's smile flickered, just for a second, and I saw the flash of discomfort cross her face. But she didn't say anything. She just took Bradley's hand and let him continue. So let's raise a glass, Bradley concluded, to new beginnings. To leaving the past behind. And to the bright future ahead. Glasses clinked. Applause filled the room. I didn't clap. I couldn't. Because I finally understood what Bradley Thornton was doing to my daughter. He wasn't just marrying her, he was erasing her. Erasing where she came from, what I had built for her, the sacrifices that had made her success possible. He was rewriting her story so that she owed everything to him and nothing to me. And she was letting him. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I made small talk with Aunt Mildred about her cats. I excused myself early, claiming a headache, and no one tried to stop me. I was almost to my car when I heard footsteps behind me. Mrs. Reeves. I turned. Bradley was walking toward me across the gravel driveway, his tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Even now, he looked like a magazine ad, effortlessly perfect, completely in control. Leaving so soon? He asked. The party's just getting started. I have an early morning. Ah, yes. Still punching the clock. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Must be nice to have such simple pleasures. I took a breath. Counted to 5. Let it out. Bradley, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye. That's one way to put it. But I love my daughter. I want her to be happy. If you make her happy, then I'm willing to put aside whatever differences we have. He laughed. Actually laughed, the sound carrying across the silent driveway like a gunshot. You're willing, he repeated. That's generous of you. But let me be real with you, Linda. After tomorrow, you're not going to be a factor in our lives. Melissa's moving forward. She's becoming a Thornton. And the Thorntons don't need a worthless loser from Worcester bringing down the brand. The words landed like physical blows. Worthless. Loser. I stared at him, and something in me went very, very cold. Excuse me? You heard me. He stepped closer, and I could smell the whiskey on his breath. You think I don't know what you are? A receptionist who got lucky. A single mother who probably trapped some poor guy with a pregnancy and then couldn't even keep him around. You've got nothing to offer Melissa, no connections, no class, no value. The only thing you're good for is writing checks, and once those stop, there's no reason for her to keep pretending you matter. He finished his whiskey and set the glass on the hood of my car. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to show up tomorrow, sit where you're told, keep your mouth shut, and smile for the photos we probably won't use. And then you're going to fade out of our lives like you never existed. Because that's what's best for Melissa. That's what's best for the Thorntons. And frankly, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper, it's what you deserve. He turned and walked back toward the house without waiting for a response. I stood there in the driveway for a long time, staring at the empty whiskey glass on my car. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. From rage. He had no idea who I was. He had never bothered to find out. He had simply looked at me, made his assumptions, and written me off. Big mistake. The biggest of his life. I got in my car and drove home. And I made a phone call. Linda. It's been a while. Robert Chen's voice on the phone was warm, curious. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, not because of any falling out, but because we'd both moved on to different chapters. He was semi-retired now, serving on various corporate boards, mentoring young entrepreneurs, generally enjoying the fruits of our labor. I had been trying to enjoy mine too. Unsuccessfully, as it turned out. I need a favor, I said. A big one. Name it. That was Robert. No hesitation, no caveats. After everything we'd built together, he knew I wouldn't ask unless it mattered. Bradley Thornton III, I said. He works at Mercer and Whitfield Partners. I need to know everything there is to know about him. A pause. Then, this is about your daughter. This is about protecting my daughter. Whether she wants me to or not. Okay, Robert said. Give me 48 hours. He called back in 36. Linda, you need to sit down. I'm already sitting. No, I mean really sit down. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything. He was right. Bradley Thornton III wasn't just arrogant and entitled. He was a criminal. Over the next week, Robert and I pieced together the full picture, using his connections at Mercer and Whitfield and some very expensive forensic accountants. The evidence was damning and extensive. It started with gambling. Bradley had developed a serious sports betting habit during business school, the kind of habit that starts with friendly wagers and ends with six-figure debts to people who don't accept payment plans. He'd hidden it well, separate accounts, cash transactions, a bookie who operated out of a back room in Chinatown, but hiding it cost money. Money he didn't have. So he started taking it from the firm. It was sophisticated, I'll give him that. Small amounts skimmed from client accounts, disguised as management fees and administrative costs. Nothing large enough to trigger an audit, nothing obvious enough to raise red flags. Just a steady drip of other people's money flowing into his pocket. 3 years. $400,000. And counting. But here's where it got interesting. Bradley wasn't just stealing from Mercer and Whitfield. He was stealing from specific clients, ones he thought were too old or too disengaged to notice. One of those clients was the Massachusetts Teachers Pension Fund. And the board of the Massachusetts Teachers Pension Fund included Robert Chen. He's been skimming from my account, Robert said, and even over the phone I could hear the cold fury in his voice. From teachers. From people who spent their lives in classrooms and trusted us to protect their retirement. What do you want to do? I want to nail him to the wall. But I want to do it your way. Whatever you're planning, I'm in. I spent the next 6 months preparing. The wedding wasn't for another 3 months after my conversation with Robert, and I used every single day. I gathered evidence, emails, account statements, transaction records, everything needed to prove Bradley's guilt beyond any doubt. I consulted with attorneys, not to sue, but to make sure what I had would hold up when I handed it to the authorities. I met with the partners at Mercer and Whitfield discreetly, through Robert, and planted the seeds of suspicion without revealing my hand. And I watched. I watched Bradley grow more confident as the wedding approached. I watched him parade Melissa around like a trophy, introduce her to his clients as my beautiful bride from humble beginnings, use her story to make himself look magnanimous and charitable. I watched him smirk at me during the engagement party, the bridal shower, every family event where I sat alone at the edges while Melissa pretended not to notice. I watched, and I waited, and I prepared. The hardest part was Melissa. I tried to reach her, I really did. I called, I texted, I asked if we could have lunch, just the two of us. Every time, she was busy. Every time, she was rushing off to some appointment or event or meeting that Bradley had arranged. The few times we did talk, the conversation felt scripted, like she was reciting lines someone else had written. Mom, everything's fine. Bradley takes care of everything. I'm happy. Are you? Really? Yes. I just need you to trust me. But I didn't trust her judgment anymore. How could I, when she'd allowed herself to be so thoroughly manipulated? When she'd stood silent while the man she was marrying called her mother a worthless loser? I couldn't save her from Bradley. That wasn't my choice to make. But I could make sure she saw the truth. What she did with it after that was up to her. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my living room with a glass of wine and the USB drive that contained everything. 3 years of fraud. Hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars. A career built on lies and other people's money. All of it, ready to be revealed. I thought about my daughter in her wedding dress, walking down the aisle toward a man who saw her as nothing more than a transaction. I thought about the girl she used to be, the woman I had raised her to become, the life she was about to lock herself into. And I thought about what Bradley had said to me in that driveway. A worthless loser from Worcester. I finished my wine and went to bed. Tomorrow was going to be a big day. The wedding was beautiful. I'll give the Thorntons that much, they knew how to put on a show. The estate gardens were immaculate, the ceremony arch draped in white roses and eucalyptus, the chairs arranged in perfect rows on a lawn so green it looked artificial. 300 guests in their finest attire, dabbing at their eyes as Melissa walked down the aisle on the arm of Bradley's father. Her own father was, conveniently, still unlocatable and uninvited even if he'd been found. I sat in the back row, as assigned. I smiled when Melissa glanced my way. I clapped when they were pronounced husband and wife. I watched them kiss and walk back up the aisle as Mr. and Mrs. Bradley Thornton III, and I felt nothing. Not sadness. Not anger. Not even resignation. Just clarity. The reception began at 5, and by 6:30, everyone had made their way through the cocktail hour and into the ballroom for dinner. Speeches were scheduled for 7. I had timed everything precisely. At 6:45, while the guests were distracted by the seared scallop appetizers and the sommelier's wine recommendations, I excused myself from table 23 and found a quiet corner near the service entrance. I pulled out my phone and sent 3 pre-written emails simultaneously. One to the Sex Enforcement Division. One to the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. One to the senior partners at Mercer and Whitfield. Each email contained the same USB drive contents I was carrying in my purse, digitized evidence of Bradley's embezzlement, ready for investigation. I'd consulted with enough attorneys to know that what I was doing might be considered interference, might even have legal consequences for me. But the attorneys had also assured me that the evidence itself was solid, and that the authorities would be far more interested in Bradley than in how they'd learned about his crimes. Sometimes you have to break a few rules to enforce the important ones. By 7 o'clock, I was back in my seat, watching the waiters clear the appetizer plates and the wedding coordinator signal to the DJ. Speeches were about to begin. Bradley's father went first, then his mother, then his best man, the same parade of self-congratulation I'd witnessed at the rehearsal dinner. I tuned most of it out, watching the clock on my phone instead. The emails should have been received by now. The partners would be checking their inboxes. The wheels would be starting to turn. And then it was time. Bradley stood for his speech, the same smug smile, the same polished delivery, the same underlying message that Melissa was lucky to have been elevated by his family. He thanked everyone for coming. He praised his parents for their guidance. He made a joke about how Melissa was still learning which fork to use that got a big laugh from the crowd and a tight smile from Melissa herself. He was just hitting his stride when I stood up. The movement caught the attention of a few people nearby, then a few more. By the time I was walking toward the center of the room, the murmuring had started. By the time I reached the middle of the ballroom floor, even Bradley had noticed. "Mrs. Reeves," he said, his voice carrying over the microphone with forced cheerfulness. "Would you like to say something?" "Yes," I said. "I would." And then I told them all exactly who Bradley Thornton III really was. I kept my voice calm. I kept my facts straight. I laid out 3 years of fraud in 5 minutes of clear, precise language that left no room for misinterpretation. I named the amounts. I named the accounts. I named the pension fund whose teachers' retirement money had been funding Bradley's gambling habit. And then I held up the USB drive. This contains all the evidence, I said. Financial records, transaction histories, email correspondence. I've already sent copies to the SEC, the Attorney General, and the partners at Mercer and Whitfield. I imagine some of you have already received my email. On cue, phones began buzzing. Bradley's boss, a man named Douglas Whitfield himself, pulled out his cell, read the screen, and turned a shade of purple I'd previously only seen in cartoons. "This is insane," Bradley said, but his voice was shaking now. "You're lying. You're a crazy old woman who's jealous of your daughter's success." "Actually," said a voice from table 3, "I can confirm that what she's saying is true." Robert Chen stood up, adjusting his suit jacket with the ease of a man who had delivered bad news in boardrooms for 30 years. "I serve on the board of the Massachusetts Teachers' Pension Fund. We began our own internal investigation 3 weeks ago based on irregularities we'd noticed. Mrs. Reeves's evidence corroborates everything we've found." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Bradley looked at Robert. Looked at me. Looked at his father, whose face had gone grey with shock. "Dad. Don't," his father said, and his voice was ice. "Don't say another word until we have lawyers present." I set the USB drive on table 12 and turned to face my daughter. Melissa was still standing at the head table, her wedding dress a cloud of white silk around her, her face a mask of devastation. She was looking at Bradley not with love anymore, but with the slowly dawning horror of someone realizing they've been conned. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "I know you're hurting. And I'm sorry this is how you had to find out. But you deserved to know the truth. You deserved to make this choice with your eyes open." "Mom," she whispered, and her voice cracked. "How could you do this? How could I not? He was stealing from pensioners, Melissa. From teachers. And he was planning to spend the rest of his life lying to you about who he really is." I paused. I couldn't let that happen. Not to you. I turned and began walking toward the exit. Behind me, the chaos was just beginning. I didn't stay for the aftermath, not all of it. But I heard about it later, from Robert and from the news coverage that followed. The ballroom devolved into pandemonium within minutes of my departure. Douglas Whitfield cornered Bradley near the cake table and, according to witnesses, told him he was finished not just at the firm, but in this industry. Victoria Thornton had to be helped to a chair by 2 waiters, hyperventilating, while her husband made frantic phone calls to their family attorneys. The guests, 300 of Boston's finest, scattered like roaches when the lights come on, nobody wanting to be associated with the scandal that was clearly about to explode. And Melissa. Melissa stood frozen at the head table for nearly 10 minutes, staring at her new husband as he paced and shouted and made increasingly desperate excuses. She didn't say a word. She just watched. And when he finally turned to her, when he finally tried to reach for her hand and explain himself, she pulled away. "Don't touch me," she said, loud enough for the remaining guests to hear. "Don't ever touch me again." She walked out of the ballroom in her wedding dress, got in the limousine that was supposed to take them to their honeymoon flight, and drove away. Alone. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The SEC opened a formal investigation within 3 days. Mercer and Whitfield fired Bradley immediately and released a statement distancing themselves from his individual criminal conduct. The Massachusetts Attorney General announced charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The pension fund filed a civil suit for the full amount of the stolen funds plus damages. Bradley's face was on the front page of the Boston Globe for an entire week. Thornton Heir charged in pension fund embezzlement scheme. Golden Boys fall, inside the fraud that rocked Boston finance. How a mother's intuition uncovered a $1 million crime. That last one was my favorite. The Thorntons tried to contain the damage, of course. They issued statements about how Bradley had struggled with personal demons and how the family was cooperating fully with authorities. They offered to repay the stolen funds. $400,000 was pocket change to them in exchange for reduced charges and a quiet resolution. But it didn't work. The story was too good, too satisfying. The arrogant rich kid brought down by the worthless loser he'd underestimated. Media outlets ran with it. Social media exploded with it. A worthless loser from Worcester had exposed one of Boston's golden boys as a common thief, and people loved it. Bradley pled guilty 6 months later. He received 3 years in federal prison, 5 years of probation, and was permanently barred from the securities industry. His assets were seized to pay restitution. His club memberships were revoked. His friends stopped returning his calls. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. And his marriage, if you could call it that, was annulled before the honeymoon was supposed to end. As for me, I kept a low profile during the media frenzy. I declined all interview requests. I didn't gloat or give statements or try to capitalize on the attention. I had done what I needed to do. The rest was noise. But there was one conversation I couldn't avoid. 3 weeks after the wedding, Melissa showed up at my door. She looked exhausted, thinner than I'd ever seen her, dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a sweater I recognized from her college days. No designer labevels. No Thornton polish. Just my daughter. Standing on my porch. Looking like she'd lost everything. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside and let her pass. We sat in the living room, the same room where I'd helped her with homework, where we'd watched movies together on Friday nights, where she told me about her first boyfriend and her college acceptance and her dreams for the future. The room that had felt so small to her, once. The room that Bradley had dismissed as beneath notice. "I don't know where to start," Melissa said. "Then don't." "Not yet." She was quiet for a long moment. "Then, he made me believe you were embarrassed by me. That you resented my success. That you wanted to hold me back because you were jealous. I know. I believed him, Mom. I chose him over you. I let him call you," her voice broke. "I let him say those things about you and I didn't stop him. I know that too. Why didn't you tell me? About the money, about the company, about who you really are." I thought about that question for a long time before I answered. "Because I didn't think it should matter," I finally said. "I didn't think you should need to know I was successful to treat me with respect. I thought the years I spent raising you, the sacrifices I made, the love I gave should have been enough." Melissa's face crumpled. "I wanted you to love me for who I was," I continued, "not what I had. And I wanted you to recognize the value in that for yourself. But somewhere along the way, you got lost. You started measuring worth in dollars and status and family names, and you stopped seeing what was right in front of you. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." She was crying now, really crying, the kind of deep, shaking sobs that come from a place beyond words. I let her cry. I didn't comfort her, not yet. She needed to feel this. She needed to understand what she'd done. But I didn't leave her alone in it either. "Sweetheart," I said eventually, "I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt. It does. And it's going to take time for us to rebuild what we lost. But I'm willing to try if you are." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "You'd do that? After everything? You're my daughter. I have loved you since before you took your first breath. That doesn't stop because you made mistakes, even big ones." I paused. "But I need you to understand something. I didn't expose Bradley to punish you. I did it because I couldn't stand by and watch you build a life on lies. You deserved the truth. What you do with it now is up to you." Melissa nodded slowly, wiped her face, sat up straighter. "I want to start over," she said. "Not just with us, with everything. I want to figure out who I actually am without someone telling me who I'm supposed to be. That sounds like a good plan. Will you help me?" I reached over and took her hand. "I've been helping you your whole life, sweetheart. I'm not going to stop now. It's been 2 years since the wedding that wasn't. I'm writing this from the terrace of my condo in Marblehead, a place I finally let myself by after the dust settled. It's modest by Thornton standards, but it has an ocean view and a second bedroom for when Melissa visits, and my orange tabby, Chester, seems to approve of the sunny spots on the hardwood floors. I never wanted to be wealthy for the sake of wealth. I wanted security. I wanted peace. I wanted to know that I could take care of myself and the people I loved without depending on anyone else's generosity. I have all of that now. And more importantly, so does Melissa. She didn't take a penny from the Thorntons after the annulment, refused it, Actually, despite their lawyers' offers. She moved into a small apartment in Somerville, got a job at a non-profit that helps first-generation college students navigate financial aid, and started rebuilding her life from scratch. It wasn't easy. She'd grown used to a certain lifestyle, certain expectations, certain shortcuts. Learning to live without them was humbling. But she did it. She's still doing it. We have dinner every Sunday now. Sometimes at my place, sometimes at hers, sometimes at the little Italian restaurant halfway between us that has become our spot. We talk about her work, my gardening, Chester's latest antics. We talk about the past sometimes too, carefully, honestly, without pretending it doesn't still hurt. Last month, she told me she's been seeing someone. A teacher at one of the schools her non-profit works with. He drives a 12-year-old Subaru, she said, smiling. And he thinks it's cool that you used to be a receptionist. Used to be, I said. I've also been a few other things. I know, Mom. I know. She's learning. We both are. I think about Bradley sometimes. Not with anger, that faded a long time ago. More with a kind of distant curiosity, the way you might think about a storm that passed through and left damage but also cleared the air. He's out of prison now, living with his parents, trying to rebuild something from the wreckage of his choices. I don't know if he'll succeed. I don't particularly care. What I care about is what his downfall taught me. Taught us. It taught me that dignity isn't something anyone can give you or take away. It's something you carry inside yourself, and you either honor it or you don't. Bradley tried to strip me of mine with his words, his assumptions, his casual cruelty. But words only have the power you give them. I gave his nothing. It taught me that protecting someone you love sometimes means letting them see an ugly truth, even when they don't want to see it. Even when they'll hate you for showing them. Real love isn't about keeping people comfortable, it's about keeping them safe. And sometimes those two things are opposites. And it taught me that strength doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be dramatic or vengeful or destructive. The strongest thing I did wasn't expose Bradley at his wedding. It was the 6 months before that, the quiet gathering of evidence, the careful consultation with attorneys and accountants, the patient building of an airtight case. The strength was in the preparation. The wedding was just the reveal. I used to wonder if I did the right thing. If there was a gentler way, a less public way, a way that wouldn't have humiliated my daughter in front of 300 people on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Maybe there was. But I don't think it would have worked. Melissa needed the shock. She needed to see Bradley's lies collapse in real time, in front of witnesses, with no room for him to spin or manipulate or explain away. She needed to understand that the man she'd chosen was not who he pretended to be, and that the mother she'd dismissed had been right all along. It was brutal. But it was true. And sometimes the truth has to hurt before it can heal. I'm 63 years old now. I've built a company and sold it for millions. I've raised a daughter alone and watched her lose her way and find it again. I've been called a worthless loser by a man who thought he knew everything about me and knew nothing at all. And I've learned that the people who underestimate you are giving you a gift. They're giving you the element of surprise. They're giving you the freedom to prepare while they're busy looking the other way. Bradley Thornton thought I was nobody. He thought I had nothing to offer. He thought he could say whatever he wanted to me because I didn't matter. He was wrong. And now he has the rest of his life to think about why.